Your sweet laughter, mornings after, ever after, I remember to you someday. I'll return to stay till every
Is that you right there?
Thank you everyone for coming out today to celebrate the life of Jim Leahey, also known as Uncle Jim. At this time, I would like to turn over the program to his son, Kanoa.
Aloha everybody, how are you doing today? Thank you for being here. First off, how about another hand for Kalai Camarillo? Thank you for the music, my man, and thank you to all of you for showing up today. I want to also give a big mahalo to St. Louis School. There's a reason why we wanted to do this here. This is my father's alma mater. He also attended Chaminade University. Chaminade, as I will get into in a little bit, is where he met my mother. And so this place meant a lot to him. We're also in the gym. He was a sports guy. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but so just this atmosphere is something that he would have absolutely loved. Even the heat. He would have wanted us to suffer just a little bit. He's like, you guys are gonna honor me, you gotta earn it just a little bit. So this is very much in the spirit of my dad. If you would indulge me for a bit, I was just thinking how much my dad would love this. Like, just would love to see all of these faces, all of these past friends, all of these past colleagues. I do believe he is here with us in spirit. I used to think that that notion was a little cheesy. You know, the idea that people are with us in spirit, yeah, of course. But going through the loss of my dad, I've definitely felt him. When I picked my father up from the mortuary, he was in his urn. I placed him in the front seat of my truck, I buckled him in, and I drove home. I took him home, and I could sense his presence. I could feel him near me, and it was comforting. I could almost hear him speaking. And you know what? The guy was still telling me how to drive. But I do know he's here, I know he's smiling, and probably also judging. Right? I know some people that are nodding their heads like, yeah, he's probably up there going like, you better make this good. James Charles Leahey. To all of us here, Jim was either a friend, a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a father, a grandfather. For me, of course, he was my pops. His accomplishments were many. I could definitely stand up here for hours and go through the accolades. A Navy veteran, 19-time Hawaii Sportscaster of the Year, inductee into the University of Hawaii Circle of Honor, member of the Gallery of Distinguished Achievers at St. Louis School, 2019 Irish Person of the Year. And true story, he even won a baby beauty pageant back in 1943. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the only beauty pageant he would go on to win. He was a man of many acknowledgments. And that's been one of the most beautiful things about the last month since his passing. The incredible outreach my family had received from people who had so much love and aloha for my dad. People from all walks of life, people who say that they were touched by him, that his ubiquitous tenor voice brought them comfort, people who literally learned from him when they were his students, when he was a teacher in high school. People who regarded him as a sage mentor full of tidbits of wisdom about work and life and family, and people who also just recall him being the funniest freaking guy that they ever knew. He had a way about him, a way of ripping somebody to shreds right in front of their face, and that person still thinking, damn, Pops is the coolest. And he was supremely proud of that recognition. Trust me when I say Pops did not mind the attention. Heck, his favorite table at Big City Diner on Wailea Avenue when Lane was here was alongside the front window where everybody walking by on the sidewalk could see him. And above that table was a framed picture which carried a caricature of his face. That is true. He loved that table. He was that guy, the undeniable center of attention. Wherever we were, it seemed like people would be drawn to him, and he'd affirm their presence by keeping them engaged via a litany of nonstop stories and jokes. He had an incomparable talent for description. He could turn a simple knock-knock joke into a 15-minute comedic saga. He loved to laugh, he loved to make people laugh, and he was one of the very best I've ever known at doing that. The thing he loved most, though, what always took precedent over everything else in his life, was his family. And that was the case from day one. My father was born to Chuck and Tibby Leahey, December 4th, 1942, almost a year to the day after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. My grandfather was a former chief in the Navy and was aboard the USS Dobbin in Pearl Harbor on the day of the attacks. He was one of the survivors. And this gruesome and tragic brush with mortality prompted my grandparents to immediately get to the baby making. And boy did they, because my dad was the first of 5 children. Jimmy, Chucky, Mickey, Charlie, and Robbie. Chucky and Charlie are here. My late Uncle Mickey's wife, Patty, is here as well with their family. Yeah. And that crew was full of characters. The oldest 3 boys in particular were a veritable improv group. They were riffing with and at each other at a level of a professional comedy team. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in their many wiffle ball battles over the years. Whether in the backyard of our house in Eva Beach or later in life in Uncle Mickey's pool, this was where their imaginations would run rampant. From the rules of the game, if the ball went over the clothesline but stayed inside the yard, it was a home run. If you hit it over the fence and into the neighbor's yard, it was considered an inconvenience to the game, automatic 3 outs, side retired. This was also where I first validated my worth in the family because I was the one small enough to be lifted over the fence to go fetch that ball. And then there were the lineups, completely made up, with names and background stories and all, that on their own merit were just funny. Rubber Legs Rockzilly, who had undergone an experimental knee surgery that replaced his ligaments with rubber bands. Bob Salva, whose name was spelled uniquely, B-O-B-B-S-U-B-B, Bob Salva. Or Sorearm Johnson, who yelped in excruciating pain every time he threw a pitch. Like, yeah! Sorearm Johnson. And the wiffle ball tradition continued for years. I didn't have any brothers, so when I was old enough, my dad would play with me in the driveway in front of our house. And again, the names. My dad's team name was the Jimmies. And so, of course, the first name of every player on his imaginary roster was John. Leadoff, Johnny Ready Eddie. First base, Big John Furco. John Mighty batted cleanup. Ace Tully was the Jimmy's ace pitcher. Ace was a nickname because his first name, of course, was actually John. He'd even supply his own crowd noise. He had this special skill at making sound effects. And he could create crowd noise with his mouth while simultaneously providing a distant whistle sound amid the crowd noise. It was crazy. And we would play for hours. And we would drive my mom absolutely nuts. But those are my favorite times in my childhood. My dad could be unpredictable at times. His hot Irish temper could sometimes be on display. There was one time, this was pre-Canoa, when Pops was in a particularly feisty mood and made my sisters clean the yard all day on Christmas. That's right, the guy who would go on to look like Santa Claus was certainly a Grinch that day. My father was an alumnus of St. Louis School, went on to attend Chaminade University where he would meet a young plantation girl from Waialua named Antoinette, my mom, Tony. They would hit it off, igniting a relationship that would withstand the test of time. That was over 60 years ago. Theirs is a love of the highest order. They would fight like heck, but no matter what, at some point, Pops would turn on the charm, and he'd be having my mom cackling again for the entire neighborhood to hear. After my dad transferred to and graduated from the University of San Francisco, he and my mother would get married in February of 1966, the same year as the first Super Bowl. That's right, my dad would always be able to remember how many years he and my mother were married because it was the same as the Super Bowl, which was usually held a couple of weeks prior to their anniversary and could serve as the perfect reminder. It was just brilliant. My dad was a proud veteran of the Navy who served during the Vietnam War on an off-coast naval medical ship. Upon his return, inspired by his experiences overseas, my father turned his focus toward educating young people. He obtained his teacher certificate from the University of Hawaii and would teach at Wailua High School as well as Campbell High School. And I know there are some Sabres in the house, right? This is what my dad would always refer to as his true calling. He loved his students, and in turn, his students loved him. He would challenge them to be curious about the world around them and to think on their own, expand their minds. In fact, he had a policy. When a student would arrive late to class, he'd only excuse their tardiness if they could conjure up a story that was so over-the-top imaginative and creative, whether or not it was true, didn't matter. He would take them with him to games that he broadcast. He'd recruit them to babysit us. He built bonds with his students, many of whom still remain in contact with our family today. At this point, the father of 3, my sister Kelly, my sister Katie, and myself, my dad was also continuing to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather, working in sportscasting, albeit on a part-time basis. One day he received a call from Bob Seavey at KGMB. Joe Moore was moving from being the main sports guy at KGMB to taking a news anchor position at KHON. So CB was looking for a sports guy to take Joe's place. He called my dad and offered him the position. My dad immediately turned it down, telling CB that he was a teacher, and that's what he loved doing. CB rebutted, offering to double my dad's teacher's salary, saying, "Jim, when are you going to start doing things for your own children and not other people's?" My dad responded by once again saying he felt like his students were his children, and that it wasn't about the money for him. "I cannot accept your offer," he said. So after a brief pause, CB then said, "What if I tripled your salary?" My dad said, "What day would you like me to start?" Everyone has their price, I guess. But in the end, this was indicative of what my dad was ultimately all about. Above all else, he was a man committed to his faith and committed to his family. He strived to do everything he could to build a life for us. Of course, Jim Leahey would go on to become the full-time voice of the Rainbows and what I believe to be the greatest sports broadcaster in Hawaii history. It's all there. So many joyous, triumphant moments. Yet never was he more joyful than when his granddaughter Leahey came along. That was a paradigm shift for my dad. It softened him. In many ways, it revitalized his appreciation for life, and that's also when he started to embrace the notion of being pops. When he and I began doing our show, Lady and Lady, the rest of the studio crew, oh, thank you, sir. Thanks, Uncle. The rest of the studio crew followed my lead and would refer to my dad as Pops, and it caught on big time. And I think my dad loved that. He loved being a grandpa, and he got a kick out of being a quasi-father figure for so many others. I loved my dad. I admired him. He obviously had a pretty significant impact on me. He taught me just about everything I know, from sportscasting, to curse words, to life lessons, to more curse words. He taught me his 3 rules of broadcasting. Always be yourself, always tell the truth, and never ever trust broadcast management. That last one was extremely important. But he also would constantly remind me of the importance in trying to be a good person, because when it's all said and done, as he put it, all you have is your name. He was the most brilliant man I've ever known. Despite his occasional Archie Bunker-like abrasiveness, he was an incredibly loving and caring human being. He wanted the world to be a better place. He wanted to see people of all creeds and backgrounds treated fairly. He loved as much as anything when the community would gather together at whichever arena or stadium or ballpark and unite in support of the home team. That's why he would eventually end all of his broadcasts with the phrase, "Malama pono ke kahi I ke kahi." Take care of each other. He held an affinity for this place and its people. He was also insanely talented. And with that talent came a responsibility for us as his family. We were asked to share him with the rest of the world and the community around us. And I'm so thankful that we did. Because as it turns out, our father brought a lot of joy to a lot of people for a lot of years. The last 2 years, however, have been difficult. Pops got sick, suffered from dementia. And while there were flashes of the old Jim here and there, he wasn't the same guy. I started to fear that that was going to be the version of my dad that I'd always remembered. That the dad I knew growing up was somewhere in the backdrop. This was who I was going to primarily think of for the rest of the time. I mean, I loved him regardless, of course, but I was frightened because it was becoming harder to envision his true form. That scared me deeply. But when he passed, something remarkable happened, as if a switch went off in my mind. Almost immediately, the primary image of my dad was no longer the one who was stricken with a debilitating condition, but the man whose brilliance, humor, and affection enveloped everyone who entered his orbit. That was the Pops that was at the forefront again, just like before. I was comforted by that. It was soothing. It was healing. Because in a way, while I was saying goodbye to my dad, I was also saying hello to him again. And for that, I will be forever thankful. I love you, Dad. I miss you. but I do know you're with us in spirit. And as he would say, malamapono kekahi ikekai. How about another hand? How about keep it going? Thank you guys. Thank you all for coming. We went a little bit longer as usual. That was kind of Pops' style too, so we appreciate it. It's just sort of in line with that. But thank you so much for coming. Outside those doors, just in that little courtyard area, if you want to make your way out there, we have some bentos for you, some beverages, so please feel free to take that on your way out. All we ask, or St. Louis asks, is that we don't eat inside the gym. So if you want to take that with you, if you want to hang out there, that's fine. But thank you all very much. We love you. On behalf of my family, we appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for honoring my dad. Have a blessed day.